All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our first National Tribal Energy Roundtable. This is on tribal voices on our energy future, presented and moderated by Daniel Cardenas and CJ Stewart of Shasta Advisors. And our guests today, we have John Wagner, Director at the Idaho National Laboratory, and Matt Morrison, Chief Executive Officer with the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. So we're honored to have you both. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we start, just a few words about the hosting program. My name is Michelle Littlefield. I'm a program coordinator with USEA Consensus Program, we call it for short. So this is a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. The program seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and stakeholders on CCUS and carbon management technologies, including tribal energy. So we do this by hosting webinars such as these, along with a series of monthly educational briefings, conference workshops, technical reports, and we release bi-monthly news clips of CCUS and carbon management related updates. So this could be CCUS, rare earth elements, critical minerals, blue hydrogen, and environmental justice as it relates to carbon management. So if you'd like to join our mailing list, feel free to send me an email to the address at the bottom of your screen. Thank you very much. With that, I'll pass it on to Daniel.
Thanks, Michelle. I just wanted to start out. I'm going to make an introduction of my partner, CJ Stewart. He'll start off by making some opening remarks, and then I'll follow, and then our speakers. But I just wanted to just give a little bit of an overview of the our series of webinars, and what the purpose is, just overall in general. Of this series will be our national discussion on energy, climate adoption, and transitions between primary energy sources needs to include tribes and our tribal communities. Tribes and our peoples have been at the forefront of energy security for the United States and thus the world, especially in the production of uranium, coal, oil, and gas, and in the production of electricity through hydropower. Just like in the past, we will continue to play an important role, an integral role in that production, as well as a new production of rare earth and critical minerals, hydrogen and ammonia, and other primary energy sources. Not only do we have a role to play in continuing to provide energy security for our nation, tribes have a role to play with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, in our relationships with other Indigenous peoples of those countries, especially in the critical regions along our borders. Along with USEA, we'll be hosting 6 of these roundtables, this being the first, over the next months until the end of March. We have a rough 6 topic areas that we're going to be focusing on throughout this series. So national energy security, the DoD, the national laboratories, clean energy, higher education, and workforce development, critical minerals, research and development and advanced manufacturing, hydrogen, ammonia, and clean fuels of the future, agriculture, forestry, carbon management, and hemp, and energy infrastructure, the Great Northern Corridor, and economic development. And so hopefully we'll be able to foster a lot of discussion with our speakers and questions with our audience. And with that, I will introduce CJ Stewart, who's my partner on this effort. CJ is an enrolled member of the Crow Nation, member of the Big Lodge clan, and child of the Greasy Mouth clan. He currently serves as the Crow Nation Energy Director. Prior to that, he worked in private practice as an energy consultant for Indian energy development and infrastructure for 5 years. CJ currently serves as a board member and is the co-founder of the National Tribal Energy Association, NTEA. He was duly elected and served 2 terms of 8 years as a senator in the Crow legislative branch. There, he served as chairman of the Natural Resources Committee and the Infrastructure Development Committee for 8 years through 2015. He was instrumental in the passage of coal development deals with Cloud Peak Energy for the Big Metal Mine and with Westmoreland Coal for Tract 1. After serving in the Crow Nation legislature, CJ served as the Crow Nation Energy Advisor and Legislative Liaison in 2016. CJ was previously appointed to serve on Congressman Ryan Zinke's Natural Resource Advisory Committee for the 114th Congress. He was elected by that Natural Resource Advisory Committee to serve as the vice chairman in 2014. In 2013, he was the first Native American to be appointed to serve on the Montana Coal Board by Governor Steve Bullock, where he was elected and served as vice chairman. In addition to all this, CJ worked 10 years as a coal miner. In 2019, CJ was appointed to the National Coal Council by U.S. Secretary for Energy Rick Perry. He was reappointed to the National Coal Council by U.S. Secretary of Energy Dan Brule for a 2020 to 2022 term. CJ and his wife Tara have been married 30 years and have 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son, and 3 beautiful grandchildren. So with that, I'll introduce CJ Stewart.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to thank everybody that's attending this webinar. I know that it's been a long time coming. We've been talking to some different folks in the sector and mainly in Indian country, and we've been having meetings with some of the fossil fuel tribes, and I know that a lot of folks are reaching out and wanting to know exactly different plans and ideas with Indian country and how best uses and developments for fossil fuel development. And so, Daniel and I have been together for quite a while, working together in this sector and this piece. And so it's been, it's been tough at times, but at the same time, we're happy to be here to help educate and help, guide other tribes, as well as, the corporate world to working with tribes, and how we can help tribes work with the corporate world. And so with that, I wanted to, close that piece there, and wanted to get into my introduction here. I know you all met Daniel Cardenas. Daniel Cardenas Jr. is a member of the Hamawa, I can't say that, Daniel, the Mawawi band of the Pit River tribe in California. He makes his home at St. Stephen's, Wyoming, Alturas, California, and Miami, Florida, with his 6 children. Daniel graduated high school at River City High School, West Sacramento, California, attending the University of California, Berkeley, in Berkeley, California. Daniel served as an elected member of the Pit River Tribal Council, a federally recognized tribe representing the Hamani band for over 15 years, from 1992 to 2016. He has owned and operated Hamani Communications and Public Relations firm, Shasta Advisors and Business Consulting firm, and Sweetgrass Government Relations and Government Relations Lobbying Advocacy firm since 1999. Daniel served as a principal with I'm gonna be butchering this up, the Yavapai Regional Capital for several years, where he developed public-private partnerships in the Western United States. These projects included 2 rail projects, a bridge project, and a toll road project. He is also the owner of 7 Generations Infrastructure, tribal renewable energy and infrastructure development firm. Daniel has served on various nonprofit boards, including the Wyoming Food Bank of the Rockies, the Wind River Tourism Council, and he co-founded the Wind River Community Foundation and Knowledge River, an Indigenous Energy STEM initiative. Daniel also served on the advisory committee of the Climate Equity and the Clean Energy Transition Project, sponsored by the Clean Air Task Force. Daniel currently serves as the CEO, President, and Chairman of the Board of the American Indian Infrastructure Association and the National Tribal Energy Association, both trade associations representing the interests of Native American tribes across the United States. Are we okay there?
Yes. Hey, CJ, thanks.
We kind of lost something here. I don't know, something happened, but we're fine now.
No worries. Well, thanks a lot for the introduction, CJ. I just wanted to start out by just giving a short introduction of, in addition to what I said earlier about what the purpose of this webinar series is going to be, and you know, what are our selfish motives, I guess you could say, to get out of it. And it's not just to hear ourselves speak, although we're both politicians, so we like to talk a lot. But the purpose to the creation of the National Tribal Energy Roundtable was to create eventually a physical, but for now a virtual hybrid roundtable to discuss tribal energy with our tribal communities, within our tribal communities. And so the purpose is to be able to provide ideas and discussion points for Indian country on tribal energy, on the development of our natural resources, have Indian country talk about what they want, and then help get that message out to the folks, for instance, like the ones that are in the audience, to the policy makers in DC and regionally within the states, and then our partners in the private sector. Also, we want to help create capacity building and technical assistance eventually within an Indian country when it comes to energy development. The main point I wanted to make was that although we're talking about energy, we're talking about our natural resources. To me, the most important resource of Indian country is our people, is our next generations. We always talk about 7 generations, so we should have that mindset about thinking about as tribal leaders, the things that we're going to do, the policies that we make. We need to think out 7 generations to see what the impacts will be. So to me, the human resources of our people are the most important. That's our kids. And so one of the things that I always, try to think about is think about if somehow we could figure out, like if we could see the each individual, we could see our capacity, we could see what our capacity to learn and our capacity to think, our potential, basically. If somehow we could if we were walking around and we could actually see everybody's potential, just like on our cell phones, we can see, the battery where it's at 90, 80, 50%. What if we could see the capacity of our people in that way? And the unfortunate thing is that most of our people don't reach our full capacity, and for a lot of different reasons. And so one of my goals is in life is to, with this development of Indian energy, hopefully the resources that are created, the wealth, the income that is produced can help get our people to their full capacities. And that's one of my main goals. Like I said, and I'll leave it with this. Outside the federal government, Indian country, we're the largest landowners in this country, but we're the poorest. And like I said, I don't like to focus on the negative, but we are the largest private landowners in this country. And so if we were a state, I just looked it up this morning, if we were a state, we would be number 11 between Oregon and Idaho in size. And that's the significance of Indian country for now, and that's just growing. Like I said, that's federally trust lands. A lot of tribes have private lands that if you added to that, it would just be even larger. But anyways, I'll stop there and I'll leave it to CJ to introduce our first speaker, Dr. John Wagner.
All right. We have our first speaker, Mr. John C. Wagner, and I know. Let's see here. Bring this up here. Along with the things that Daniel has been saying, and things that we've been stating in, across the federal government, I'm pretty happy to announce that we have these gentlemen here today that's going to speak to some of the issues and possibilities and opportunities that are going to be happening in Indian country. I know that, like Daniel had stated, 60% of the nation's resources is controlled by Indian country, and that's fossil fuels. That's how much the Indian country controls the fossil fuels. And so it needs to be out there, the message. We need to speak to the people, we need to speak to the public-private partnerships and the tribes to let them understand, and as well as the government. And so this is definitely something that, we're looking forward to as well. And we got Mr. Dr. John C. Wagner. He's the director of the Idaho National Laboratory and president of the Battelle Energy Alliance, LLC. He is responsible for management and integration of a large multi-purpose laboratory whose mission focuses on nuclear energy, national and homeland security, and energy and environmental science and technology. He manages the U.S. Department of Energy National Laboratory of KRE. He managed this U.S. Department of Energy National Laboratory with approximately 5,400 scientists, engineers, support staff in multiple nuclear and non-nuclear experimental facilities with an annual budget of nearly $1.6 billion. Wagner began serving as INL director on December 11, 2020. He has more than 20 years of experience performing research and managing and leading research and development projects, programs, and organizations. Wagner's experience is strongly aligned with INL's programmatic portfolio. He has guided and helped implement INL's nuclear energy strategy during an innovative and exciting time at the Nation's Center for Nuclear Energy Research and Development. As a recognized expert in reactor and fuel cycle technologies, he is called upon frequently to provide expert testimony in Congress and to advise in formalization of policies for nuclear fuel cycles and advanced reactors. He has been an INL since 2016 and served as an associate laboratory director for nuclear science and technology since 2017. His previous roles included director of domestic programs in NS&T and director of the Technical Integration Office for DOE and NA Light Water Reactor Sustainability Program at INL. Wagner initially joined INL as the chief scientist at the Materials and Fuels Complex in 2016. Prior to joining INL, he worked for nearly 17 years at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where he held several research and leadership roles in reactor and fuel cycle technologies. Wagner is a fellow at the American Nuclear Society and recipient of the 2013 E.O. Lawrence Award. He has authored or co-authored more than 170 referred journals and conference articles, technical reports, and conference summaries. He received the B.S. in nuclear engineering from the Missouri University of Science and Technology in 1992 and an MS and PhD degrees from the Pennsylvania State University in 1994 and 1997 respectively. So that's Mr. Dr. John C. Wagner.
Thank you, CJ. Sorry for the long bio. I should have sent you a shorter one, but thank you for reading all that. Appreciate
That's fine.
that.
That's fine.
And thanks to you and Daniel and Michelle all for putting this on and for having and allowing me to come speak. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll dive right in. I'm going to start with, obviously I'm the Idaho National Laboratory Director, so I'll be heavily focused on Idaho National Laboratory, but I'll start because some of the attendees may not be as familiar with the Department of Energy complex. I'll talk a little bit about that, how Idaho National Laboratory fits in all that, a little bit more about what we do, and then I've got a few highlights of examples of how we partner, how we collaborate with tribes as well as other national laboratories and tribes and universities to hopefully give the participants some ideas about how they may be able to partner with us and or some of the other national laboratories. So if we get the next slide, please. So this is a slide of all the laboratories. So there's 17 different national laboratories. I know that kind of seems like a lot, can seem pretty overwhelming. So let me try to break it down a little bit. The labs span the range, and these are all Department of Energy laboratories, just to be clear. They span the range from very, very basic science, even very focused kind of single program science laboratories, all the way up to applied energy laboratories like the Idaho National Laboratory. So they span the kind of complete gamut of fundamental science to applied. There's 17, as I mentioned. 10 of them are Office of Science laboratories, so focused on fundamental science issues. 3 of them are applied energy laboratories. Idaho National Laboratory, I've already said, is one of those. The other 2 are the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado and the National Energy Technology Laboratory that has sites in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Oregon. And then there's 3 national security laboratories, Los Alamos, Sandia, and Livermore, and then 1 environmentally focused lab, Savannah River National Lab, down in South Carolina. Next slide, please. And where we kind of fit in this overall spectrum of technology, or even discovery science all the way to deployment, is we sort of bridge the gap between universities. I mean, we do span the entire range, but a lot of our focus is between sort of fundamental science at universities and deployment of technologies in the private sector. We're all, well, most of the labs are pretty large. They stored substantial taxpayer investment in research facilities. And they also employ multidisciplinary teams. So one of the unique things about a national laboratory is the ability to bring together expertise from a lot of different disciplines, technical disciplines, I mean, with the infrastructure, facilities, instruments, all those kind of research tools and capabilities to address major problems or challenges for the nation. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit, and I'll focus more on Idaho National Laboratory. Our origin dates back to 1949. Of course, our site has an origin before that, but in 1949, what is now our site was established as the National Reactor Testing Station. It was established specifically to develop nuclear energy, safe use of nuclear energy for electricity and other energy applications. And so that was where the very first reactor that generated electricity actually lit up 4 light bulbs. That was the Experimental Breeder Reactor 1 back in 1951. The first place where a nuclear energy powered a city, that was Arco, Idaho, back in the early 50s. I think it was 53. And then it evolved from there. So nuclear power was essentially born in the Idaho desert, the southeast part of Idaho, back in the 50s. And many firsts occurred. Might sound strange, but the nuclear navy was born in the desert in Idaho. The first prototypes, and then literally thousands of naval reactor operators were trained on our site over the years. 52 different nuclear reactors were developed and operated, constructed and operated on that site over the years. And lots of different technologies, lots of different experiments for a lot of different purposes to understand kind of the safety envelope of different nuclear energy technologies with a strong focus on electricity. Now, as you probably know, nuclear power is used throughout the world. In fact, 10% of the total electricity used in the world is generated with nuclear power. About 20% in the United States of all of our electricity comes from nuclear. And more than 50% of the non-carbon emitting electricity generated in the US today comes from nuclear power. So more than all other non-carbon emitting electricity sources combined is what nuclear represents. So because of that, there's a strong interest, again, in expanding nuclear energy in the country and worldwide. Next slide, please. So maybe one last point on the heritage. Every reactor around the world can trace some part of its technology or safety data back to what occurred back in the 50s and 60s in the state of Idaho in the United States. Now, today, we're a broader mission laboratory. Our primary focus is still on nuclear, but we do a lot of other things. So let me try to put that in context. So our vision, I think, frames it really well, and then I'll dive in a little bit more details. Our vision is to change the world's energy future and secure our critical infrastructure. So if you pull that apart into 2 pieces, energy, clean energy. So our focus there obviously is nuclear energy. That's the primary part of our focus for energy. but it's also how does nuclear energy work with intermittent sources, hydro, wind, solar, etc., in an integrated system. How does that work effectively and efficiently? And then also using nuclear for things other than electricity. As we look to deep decarbonization in the country and beyond, that's a lot more than just electricity. We have to think about industrial uses of energy, transportation, etc. And so how would we use a nuclear for things like hydrogen generation, industrial heat applications, desalination, etc. It can be used for all those things, but currently in the US, for sort of historic reasons, we have not used it for anything besides electricity. Then security, critical infrastructure. So our big focus there is, of course, on the security of our critical infrastructure, but in particular, both physical and cyber. And so we have a very strong focus in control system cyber. Now, control systems are in essentially everything today. They're very much in all of our energy infrastructure, our water infrastructure, all of our critical infrastructure. Heck, you've got control systems in your car if you drive a modern car. So that's our big focus, is these things where you can use control systems to do physical manipulations. How do we keep those safe from a cyber means? Now, I want to comment on the images that you have in front of you. We've got wildfires in the West that are increasingly severe. We've got increasingly severe weather events. This is all things related to climate, that we have a concern with respect to clean energy, but we also do research with respect to how do we make the physical infrastructure secure even from more severe weather events. The image in the middle is actually from a power outage a year ago, February, in Texas, where more than 250 people lost their lives because power was out for more than 72 hours. This goes to the security and resilience of our energy system, something we work a lot on. The fourth image from the left represents the gas shortages from the Colonial Pipeline hack. Again, an area where our cyber expertise identifies those vulnerabilities and works to try to fix them before such things happen. And then last but not least, the unprovoked attack of Ukraine by Russia has made us all think differently about energy security and as a part of national security and supply chain securities as they relate to energy and other things. So all things that we're very focused on. Next slide, please. So here I'd like to just show you, what does it look like? What does Idaho National Laboratory look like? We can go ahead and start. This is our Idaho Falls campus. The 4 buildings to the left are secure facilities for our National Homeland Security portfolio. The big white building in the middle is our Energy Innovation Laboratory, and the white set of buildings over to the side is our Energy Systems Laboratory. The big gray building in front of you here is our Cyber Core Integration Center. Behind it, we have our Collaborative Computing Center and our Center for Advanced Energy Studies. And then now we're looking again at the Energy Innovation Lab. Our site is bordered to the west by the Snake River, which is beautiful. Many of you probably know that. This is showing one of the buses that we operate driving west onto our site. Our site itself is directly west of Idaho Falls. Here's one of our sites within the site. It's the Materials and Fuels Complex, the most comprehensive set of capabilities for nuclear fuels and materials fabrication, examination, and characterization. You might notice some building going on. We're doing a lot of modernization and adding capabilities out at this site. That silver dome there is an interesting historic landmark. That's the old Experimental Breeder Reactor 2 dome, containment dome. This is an overlook of our critical infrastructure test range. This is where we do at scale energy security testing. And I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. Here's our advanced test reactor complex. This is the premier thermal testing capability in the world, the largest, most powerful thermal neutron radiation testing capability, the backbone of our nuclear Navy fuels and materials testing, as well as civilian nuclear energy. Last but not least, up to the north of our site is our specific manufacturing capability. Up here, we make tank armor for the Army Abrams battle tank. So you get a sense of the kind of diversity of the work that we do at the Idaho National Laboratory. Next slide, please. You also get a sense of what it looks like out on the site. Here's a different depiction. I'll note, as I've probably said already, really what makes Idaho National Laboratory truly unique from the other laboratories is our site, where we can do energy and security research, development, and demonstration at scale. And then, of course, the other unique characteristics are the research facilities infrastructure that we have on this unique site. Currently, we are over 5,500 employees. I think during the bio intro, CJ mentioned 5,400. We just surpassed 5,500 recently, just an example of how fast we're growing. There's a lot of interest in our whole mission space, clean energy and critical infrastructure security. The site itself is 890 square miles. That's 3/4 of the size of the state of Rhode Island. You can see along the right a lot of different kind of metrics. We have our own fire department, we have our own security force. We have to for such a large site. We have 4 operating nuclear reactors and a whole lot of radiological facilities to support them, as well as our own roads and so on and so forth. You kind of get the idea. I'll just note here as you look to the left of this slide, where it depicts how the site fits into the state of Idaho. Our neighbors to the north of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe on the Fort Hall Reservation, and I'll come back to them a little later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we're all about clean energy and security. I was kind of give you an example of how we're organized and a little bit about what we do in each area. So nuclear science and technology makes sense probably. We're a nuclear research development demonstration laboratory, so we have a nuclear science and technology organization. What does that mean? Very briefly, it means things like nuclear reactor technology development. There's a lot of different technologies that can be used for nuclear reactors. It means things like fuel cycle, both developing the front end of the fuel cycle with fuel and from uranium. And it also means the back end of the fuel cycle. What do you do in terms of storage, transportation, and ultimate disposal of used nuclear fuel once you're done with it? Gets into things like modeling and simulation to support further development and understanding of these systems and the safety and security of these systems. Things like fundamental fuels and materials research to understand how these systems can perform even more effectively, even more safely than they already do. And really a lot of work too around the regulatory environment, research around regulations, and how to ensure that the systems are safe and secure. I mentioned our advanced test reactor complex. That's a picture of actually looking down into the reactor. That blue glow is shrink off radiation. In the middle of materials and fuels complex, we did a flyover of that. That was where the shiny silver experimental breeder reactor 2 containment dome was. What you're looking at there is a hot cell. So radiated materials are highly radioactive. So we work behind thick walls and thick leaded glass, leaded oil actually, windows to operate with those materials to understand them and do the examinations. In the next, the energy, environment, science, and technology. That's where we do a lot of work integrating nuclear with other sources. We do a lot of work in EV battery charging, a lot of work in biofuel feedstock development and demonstration, and then a lot of work with outside users. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those in terms of how other people or even tribes can develop microgrids and be self-sufficient. Last but not least, the National Homeland Security Science and Technology Organization. I focus a lot of attention on the critical infrastructure security, but we also do a lot of work in wireless technology with a focus, of course, on security. A lot of work in training Department of Defense and other agencies with how to work in different environments, including radiological environments, perhaps from being prepared for a cleanup if somebody were to detonate a dirty bomb, for example. A lot of highly sophisticated work in the cybersecurity space in particular. Next slide, please. So here is where I'd like to transition a little bit and just talk to you, maybe hopefully give some ideas in terms of how we work with different tribes. So I mentioned the Shoshone-Bannock tribes are our neighbors to the south. They're located in the Fort Hall Reservation in southeastern Idaho. They're located between the cities of Pocatello and American Falls and Blackfoot, so right in that region, if you're familiar with the region. Currently, there's nearly 6,000 tribal members. And we work with them, at least what I'm highlighting here is how we work with them with regard to preservation of historic cultural resources. We work with them to understand, so What I didn't say when I was talking about our site is that this is our site was obviously, maybe not obviously, but was migration areas and inhabited by lots of different indigenous people, but particularly the Shoshone and Bannock tribes. And so there's a rich history there on this land that we work with them to understand and preserve, to understand and manage the natural and the cultural resources on the site, and to protect these sites for future generations. As an example, during last fiscal year, for us that would be fiscal year 2022, with significant input from the Shoshone Bannock tribes, we revisited and re-recorded 9 significant archaeological sites, providing something called X-ray fluorescence analysis, which is an elemental analysis, and producing research proposals with them. We also work to make sure that the tribal members have access to important locations on the site, historical locations, while protecting those places from non-tribal interference. So we also have a security kind of mission in terms of preserving, making sure that these sites aren't interfered with. One example, that type of engagement was Earth Day just this past year. It's kind of, there's an image right in the middle representing the Earth Day, where we facilitated a tribal ceremony at a cave on the INL site. And there's some other pictures here. I'll just really quickly, that bigger image. We had tribal consultation representatives there as we were looking to build out some additional grid related, additional grid, and making sure that as we looked at where we were going to locate it, that we didn't disturb anything. And if we ran into anything, that we would preserve it and work around it. Next slide, please. Another area of collaboration for us is STEM education and then the associated workforce development from that. I certainly took note of something, I'll take a little side note here of something that Daniel said. The most important asset is our people and achieving full capacity of those people. And we see this as a great opportunity for a real win-win. And so last year we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Shoshone Bannock School District to enhance educational experience and create career technical opportunities for tribal students. Our K-12 STEM team is working closely with the school district to design culturally responsive teaching and learning through project-based, place-based, and service learning approaches. One example is our safety and security group held a safety and security day camp just last month. And that's the image on the bottom right is represented there. 43 high school students from the Shoshone Bannock tribes attended this day camp at our live fire range complex, which involved hands-on activities and presentations, and really got great engagement. And they can, and several of our members of that organization are tribal members, so several of our employees, and so really helped see, they could see some of themselves potentially working at the laboratory and what kind of work that would involve. Next slide, please. There's a lot there, by the way, that I didn't talk about, but there's a whole lot there that we're doing in terms of developing courses and curricula in partnership with the Shoshone Bannock School District. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how we partner with other laboratories and other and with universities in the energy related area. And here I'd like to highlight that we worked with our partner laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that's in Colorado, with the Navajo Technical University and 2 other schools, the Florida International and Morgan State, on a grant proposal for the National Nuclear Security Administration. And last month we received great news that the Navajo Technical University received a $1.75 million grant that will be allocated over 5 years. This funding will do several things. It'll allow the university to enhance their undergraduate engineering programs, to develop robust graduate programs in a variety of engineering disciplines. Will build sustainable relationships between the university and the DOE and NSA, or the National Nuclear Security Administration facilities and staff, and allow for greater hands-on training and research capabilities in the areas of advanced energy systems and nuclear safety. I bring up this grant in particular because it's a testament to the power of collaboration. I don't think this would have happened had these entities not come together. And that's really one of the focus of INL partnerships with the institutions that you see highlighted on this slide. And so hopefully maybe some of the participants can think about topics that they might want to partner on with Idaho National Laboratory, or even if we could help connect, if it's not in our space, maybe we could help make a connection to a different Department of Energy laboratory. Next slide, please. Here I want to highlight water. Ensuring the availability of clean and abundant water supply is incredibly important to all of us in Eastern Idaho. While sometimes people will go, what do you mean? We have so much water. We're fortunate we have access to an aquifer the size of Lake Erie that runs in the Snake River Plain, known as the Snake River Aquifer. But despite its size, it's not a bottomless resource, and always a lot of concern appropriate to preserving our water for the future. There's a lot of different things that we do here. One is by looking at how to modernize how crops are irrigated. We can ensure that the aquifer can supply our water needs long into the future. The first step in this was to make sure that we accumulate the right information related to it. So the laboratory, Idaho National Laboratory, working with our colleagues at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory up in Washington State, developed software that allows water users to estimate how much water is lost in their current systems and how much water could be saved through specific investments. And so we're working with the tribes as they look at how to modernize their irrigation infrastructure. Next slide, please. This slide highlights a couple of collaborations that we have related to microgrids to ensure secure, reliable electricity for rural and remote communities. The one on the left is California coped with wildfire-caused power outages and rolling blackouts. The Blue Lake Ranchero tribe in the northernmost part of the state of California demonstrated how microgrids might offer a solution. So they worked with us and we helped them build out a network of solar panels, storage batteries, fuel cells, and diesel generators on their 100 acres of lands they have in Humboldt County. Their microgrid can operate as part of a broader utility network or completely on its own. And this was really interesting because in late 2019, when Pacific Gas and Electric cut power to more than 2 million people across Northern California, the tribe actually still had power, and they made hotel guest rooms available to 8 critically ill patients from the county's Health and Human Services Department. So not only were they self-sufficient, they were able to help others. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about an example in Alaska. Grid-islanded Alaskan communities rely very heavily on diesel fuel for power generation and heat. Delivery of diesel can be unpredictable, especially depending on where they're at, putting communities there at risk of power failures. So what we worked with them is also on a microgridding capability to reduce or eliminate their reliance on that. So INL partnered with Cordova to design a secure and resilient microgrid. The grid automatically reroutes power to ensure that critical public services, things like hospitals, emergency shelters, and other vital services have electricity if part of the grid is damaged or disabled. So really another great success story. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we're focused a lot on our own site in terms of making us net zero and looking at microgrids for ourselves even. So as a nuclear energy research and development and demonstration laboratory, we're very focused on how we can make our own site operations non-carbon emitting with nuclear power. So we've set our own goal to be 24/7 carbon free by 2031. And so a big part of that for us is probably obvious is power, but other parts are are cleaning our transportation. We have a lot of different vehicles. We have a landfill. We have our own diesel generators and remote application power systems. So taking the entirety of our site, which actually kind of is like a small state, and driving ourselves to net zero carbon emissions, and then using that as a test platform that others can come see and then learn from as they embark on similar types of goals. I think that's my last slide. But next slide, please. So thank you for the time, and I'll turn it back over to CJ.
Yeah, I want to thank you, John. We've been, I appreciate the fact that you're very close in line with Native Americans over there in the area of Idaho, and that your relationship with them it sounds like a pretty good relationship that you have. A lot of people don't have that. They don't necessarily have those relationships with Indian country. And that's why it's really important for these webinars and get your voice out there, as well as the others that are going to be on these webinars. I truly appreciate all the things that you're bringing out. I know there was a wide array of things. I know this is probably maybe the nutshell version of what INL is doing and the things that are going on there. I truly appreciate that. I want to go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Daniel Cardenas. I know that's kind of where he's the next. He's going to be introducing Mr. Matt Morrison.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, John, Dr. Wagner. There's already some questions. So I think after Matt speaks, Mr. Morrison, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And so there's already a good question, and I have some of my own after listening to Dr. Wagner's presentation. And so, sorry, let me put myself on there. Sorry. So I'll introduce Matt Morrison, who's a good friend of mine. Matt Morrison serves as the CEO of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, PNWER, which was established in 1991 by statute in the states of Alaska, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Oregon, and Western Canadian provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, the Yukon, and Northwest Territory. Mr. Morrison also manages PNWER's Center for Regional Disaster Resilience, CRDR. As the CEO of PNWER, Mr. Morrison's responsibilities include coordinating all PNWER projects and reporting to the governing board, which consists of legislative leadership of each state, province, and territory, governors and premiers, and private sector leaders. The mandate of PNWER is to build the region's economy while enhancing the region's natural environment. PNWER's 15 working groups focus on trade and border issues, economic development, agriculture, energy and environment, invasive species, tourism, transportation, and workforce, among several others. Mr. Morrison is a leader in promoting innovation in the Canada-US border region and has been instrumental in several successful pilots of the Beyond the Border and Perimeter Security Action Plan. PNWER has encouraged both Ottawa and Washington, D.C. to consider the region a cross-border pilot zone because of the network of trusted relationships built by the ongoing working groups and that PNWER facilitates. Mr. Morrison has been engaged in building economic resilience over the past decade by hosting a series of critical infrastructure interdependency exercises focused on the regional economy and through the Center for Regional Disaster Resilience, addressing public and private gaps and vulnerabilities to mitigate risks from all hazards to the regional economy. The CRDR also runs the Northwest Warning Alert and Response Network and has conducted annual cybersecurity exercises in Washington State and Idaho for the past several years, focusing on cyber resilience and training. In addition, Mr. Morrison has been instrumental in coordinating with the Canadian government on infrastructure and port security and preparedness issues related to the Pacific Northwest, including our joint exercises leading up to the 2010 Winter Olympics. Along with his role at PNWER, Mr. Morrison is co-chair of the Futures of the Future Borders Coalition, www.futureborderscoalition.org, a group of public and private organizations bringing solutions to border issues in all modes, at the Canada-US border. The FBC is currently working on COVID resilience and solutions to safety, easing border restrictions based on science and health standards. Mr. Morrison lives in Seattle with his wife, Beth. He and Beth have 4 adult children with whom they enjoy skiing, sailing, and hiking. So with that, I'll introduce Mr. Matt Morrison.
Hey, thanks very much, Daniel. And thank you, CJ and John Wagner. It's great to have that comprehensive analysis of what the lab is doing at INL. We have a great partnership with INL, and I'll cover maybe 3 or 4 areas. The first is, and John, I decided not to do a PowerPoint, but I really appreciated yours and maybe was wishing I had done it. The first thing is just Penware itself. It's a very unique statutory entity that crosses the border into Canada. We are each other's largest trading partners, and our economic watersheds flow north and south. And talking about First Nation issues is vitally important to the economic development of our 10 jurisdictions. So we have 5 states, 5 provinces and territories, and a 30-year history. As Daniel mentioned, we have 15 different working groups that cover the gamut of all the key industry sectors in the region. Energy is absolutely one of the most important ones, along with transportation. And this year we were designated by the U.S. Department of Transportation as a regional infrastructure accelerator, one of 5 in the nation, looking at how we can think strategically on a regional level on our infrastructure investments. As I think everyone on this call knows, the U.S. is making the largest ever investment in infrastructure, both transportation and energy, in our history as a nation. So it's very important that we look at a regional, if not a national perspective, in how we make those investments. In many years ago, 15 years ago, our energy chairman and energy ministers who meet regularly got together over a series of 18 months and decided that one of the things they really needed was a boot camp for state and provincial policymakers on energy issues. And we started the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute, which is actually takes place for 4 days every July at the PNNL, the Pacific Northwest National Lab, and then another 3.5 days in Washington, D.C. And we are getting ready to head out there in 3 weeks for the second part of that energy session on looking at all kinds of energy issues, how energy is really down to the electron, how the energy system works, how it's built, how it's financed, how it's regulated, and what are the key policy issues that utilities are going through, and how are we going to have an energy system that moves toward net zero in the future. So we have had over 350 legislators go through a 60-credit course in this. DOE thought it was such a great program in 2010 that they pushed us to make it nationwide, and we now have had legislators from I think 43 of the 50 states, as well as most of the Canadian provinces. So we deal with a lot of these issues through the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute we call LEHI. I've also been very engaged with the First Nation Major Projects Coalition in Canada. And Nilo Edwards, Mark Podlaski, have actually just recently had a wonderful webinar entitled "The Only Road to Net Zero Runs Through Indigenous Lands." And I think that that's really significant statement. In Canada, there's so many, not only a transmission for electrical grid, but critical minerals that are absolutely essential for the future of our move toward net zero, are on native lands. And I think that the opportunity to work cross-border, both Canada and the US, on Indian country and understanding the resources and the opportunities that native lands have for this overall strategic investment is absolutely critical. So I commend DOE and the organizers of this webinar and this webinar series to really begin addressing the opportunities across the United States in terms of energy resources that are absolutely critical for our entire nation. And learning and sharing with Canada is a real positive. So I wanted to talk briefly about the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator. We have had many policy tours up to Canada, for example, to look at their Pacific Gateway project, which was an amazing policy initiative some 15 years ago to align the federal government, the provincial governments, the local governments in a comprehensive effort to build a Pacific Gateway. And I've taken our port directors and state DOT directors up there to see that, they built, for example, 18 grade separation projects for their rail system in 2 years. And we've been trying to build 2 of them in the past 18 years in the Pacific Northwest. So a comprehensive plan for strategic infrastructure is absolutely needed, especially now over the next 5 years as the IIJA is really implemented by the states. And I think that the other thing that's really been very instrumental in Canada is they've developed, I think, a very comprehensive P3 program, or public-private partnerships. How do they leverage the public investment in infrastructure with private investment for the good of the public? And every province has a P3 organization that helps consider whether a major project could be considered a P3. So that's one of the things that the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator from the Build America Bureau at the USDOT is interested in looking at. And I think that's a very timely discussion. Just an example of that is, I live in Seattle, and people here have never been to Saskatchewan, but in Saskatchewan, BHP is building the largest ever potash mine in the world in the next 5 years. And we do not have the current infrastructure to get that product to market, either in Canada or in the US. All of these things have to be seen in an integrated fashion. And I guess that's where I'll bring up just briefly our Center for Regional Infrastructure Resilience, where we've looked at the interdependencies of our infrastructure. Just as John Wagner talked about the importance of microgrids and the stability of the smart grid, as we move toward electrification, electrifying our vehicles and trucks. We have new issues about the sustainability and the resilience of these electrical systems. So at our winter meeting in Portland, we're going to be touring the first ever heavy duty truck charging station at Electric Island outside of Portland that Daimler did with PGE, for example. Our RIA is also looking at tribal facilities that own truck stops that would like to consider electrifying those or making that possible as we look toward more capacity for electric trucks. We are also in the midst of the hydrogen hub proposals that DOE will be initiating shortly. And that's another key area to be considered, especially for the future of transportation and our highway system, how we can link the possibility of hydrogen hubs on our major freeway systems. So from a PennWer perspective, we're taking a 10 jurisdiction, 10 state, 5 state, 5 provinces, and looking out, a decade or 2 decades. What is the infrastructure we need to have a resilient infrastructure and to be able to handle the demands as we move toward net zero in our entire energy system? And I think that the tribes are a key to this. They're absolutely a key to developing a comprehensive recognition of the importance of critical minerals, the importance of how we move energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed. The other thing I would mention is our current president of PennWer is from Idaho, president of the Idaho Senate, Chuck Winder. And his initiative for PennWer this year is to seek for all of our working groups to help develop a Canada-US energy security and sustainability framework. And we are working with the national labs, with a number of our educational institutions, research institutions, with our private sector members to create a framework that is a sensible framework of how we move securely toward a sustainable future and how we build this transition. What we want is the recognition that all GHGs are not equal. If you have a lithium mine that might produce 100,000 tons of GHGs, but it may avoid 1 million tons when that lithium is put into electric cars. We need a framework to be able to make those policy decisions. So our legislative bodies in all of our 10 jurisdictions are grappling with these issues, and we need to have common sense frameworks so that our permitting systems look at the overall goals of moving toward net zero. So I just throw that out for the future discussions and also the future of this webinar series. The Canada and the US are so intricately interconnected in our energy systems that we really have to be seeing it as one entity. And that's why, again, the First Nations are so important in Canada, and the tribes are so important in Western US in particular. So there's a lot more I could say. I think we have an active water policy working group. The water has everything to do with energy, with our hydroelectric facilities. We are very involved in invasive species, invasive mussels, which can wreak havoc on hydroelectric power, some owned by indigenous tribes, as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we share the same watersheds. The Columbia River Basin is shared by Canada and the U.S. We're in the midst of a treaty. All of these issues require more and more understanding and bringing together policymakers, business leaders, academics to address the challenging challenges that we have. And that's really Penware's goal is to look at these challenges and come up with regional solutions and present them to both federal governments. So I'm, enthused to be part of this dialogue here today. Very encouraged by what Idaho National Labs is doing. And John, I'm really hopeful. We have a big summit coming to Boise in July this next year, and I hope that we'll be able to bring a busload of legislators out to see some of the amazing work that is done on the lab. And I look forward to your input on our Canada-US energy security and sustainability framework. What we all see is the global geopolitics have changed with the Ukraine war, and it is incumbent upon all of us to really be thinking about how we create sustainable energy solutions for the future. So with that, I'll turn it back to you. I mean, there's, again, a lot I could say, but I want to give time for a dialogue and happy to take questions. But thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this. Back to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate your comments, and it has. I think it's given me a lot of ideas. But that's how our conversations go when you and I speak. A lot of stuff comes out of that. I'm really grateful to have you as a speaker, as well as Dr. Wagner. I just wanted to say before we move on to, we have a question from the audience, but just really quick, I did meet Matt years ago. I can't remember how long ago. We have a common friend that used to be in charge of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, and that's how we were introduced from Mark. Years ago, when I was invited to Toronto one year to speak about tribal public-private partnerships, and so it's been a great knowing Matt and having these conversations. One of the things I did ask both of the speakers to think about as we move forward in these discussions is, if you were in charge, if you had the resources that you needed to be able to get some things done, what would those relationships within the country look like? And so I think that's part of the discussion is as we move forward into the future, especially with folks from the DOE who are our ultimate audience, is for them to think about what's been said today, what will be said over the next 5 other webinars, and hopefully that continues past that. But as food for thought as we move forward. And so some of the things that just really quick, but that Matt had mentioned, and Matt knows I've mentioned it before, and something that maybe may or may never happen, but I think Penware's strong commitment to Indian country, to the First Nations, and to tribes, I think is important. Obviously, Penware's like I said, a statutory organization of those states and of those provinces. But anything that hopefully, maybe the chairman and the board members can think about it as well, is anything I think that Penware could do to increase tribal participation in their group just benefits everybody. I think that there's so many groups out there, and so the tribal leaders get inundated with a group for almost every subject, and they have to prioritize what their important issues are. But for me, because in CJ, we think and eat and sleep energy 100% of our time. But like you'd mentioned, energy, and what Dr. Wagner mentioned as well, is energy is not just electricity. It produces everything that we use in our economy, and I think that's something that we tribes need to also look at and focus on, is that we could turn to 100% renewable energy tomorrow, which would be great. But renewable energy doesn't create pharmaceuticals and clothes, and it doesn't create the products that we need. We need certain fossil fuels for that, and so especially oil for our medicines and for our clothing and automobiles and everything that our iPads and everything that we use is still very fossil fuels are still needed. They can be cleaner, and so but I just wanted to make that point, because I think that talking with you two, having you speak and having this discussion reminds me that and I'm not a scientist, or I'm not an expert in certain ways on certain things, but I have been reading lately about now I forgot what I was going to say, but tribes and tribal people traditionally have always thought in a holistic way. Everything is related to everything else. We don't segment out our religion or our language or our history or our traditions or our culture. It's all together. It's all one. And we need to get back to that way of thinking. And a lot of us never left that way of thinking. But as we know, the Western way likes to segment things out into its specific little areas, just like we segment our homes and our yards and our streets and our towns. We like to make them nice and neat, and which in some ways is not a bad way of thinking and doing things. But when we want to think in a larger perspective, and there's a term for it, it's just on the tip of my tongue, but it's a form of critical thinking. We need to look in a bigger picture, a way of thinking, and a lot of times when we're thinking in the bigger picture way, we can't see everything. There's things that we don't know about, but I always liken it to a puzzle, and then just to keep it simple, a 500-piece puzzle. Each of the 500 pieces is really important by themselves. Has their own story and is their own picture by themselves, but when you add them together, they create a bigger picture, and they're all integral to each other. And that's really how Indian country thinks and has thought, and how we live our lives. And we just have to remind ourselves sometimes that's how we need to think about energy. And as we move forward, this energy transition, our energy future, our energy security. And so I just wanted to say that before we move forward with the question from the audience. And then once we're done with that, I have a question or two, and then maybe CJ might have some questions, and maybe the speakers may have questions of each other. That'd be great too. But Michelle, did you want to ask the question, or how should we do the question from the audience?
I can list it out right now. So far, we have one here that is open. So it's, what is the name of the team or consortium PNWER is on to submit for the DOE Regional Hydrogen Hub competition? And are there any tribal communities on your team?
Yeah, I would say that this, we have been part of a large consortium in Washington and Oregon State. And I know Daniel's been part of that consortium as well. There's absolutely an interest in making sure that Native communities are part of that consortium once the DOE RFP is out. So, and Daniel, you could probably comment on that as well.
Yeah, I will say that the RFP has been out. Actually, it's due soon. Or actually, the letter of intent is due. And then after the letter of intent, there'll be a more fuller, larger. I think the letter of intent's like 50 pages, but after that, it's a large application. I think that's due. I want to say December, January timeframe. But I have been involved in the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub as a partner. There are several tribes that are involved at the board level of that. They created their own organization around the application, and I believe there's at least two tribes from Washington State that are members of that board. I don't remember the names. I can't pronounce them anyways. I would butcher that, but we can get that information to the audited member who asked the question. Also, I wanted to mention that if there are questions, folks, there are obviously not everybody could have been on today. People will watch this. It's being recorded. It'll be available tomorrow on the website. These speakers in our webinar. But if anybody's watching in the future that will be watching this and has any questions, they can still ask questions. They can send us the questions, and we can send them to the speakers if they're specific to each individual speaker, and then we can get the answer back. That's sort of the idea behind also the larger set of webinars, is we wanted to continue the conversation and keep it going. And so even though the speakers will most likely just speak once, we'll have different speakers at each of the webinars. We want to continue the conversation and the dialogue with the speakers, because I think they so far they've had a lot to say, very interesting and very integral into the vision that we've had for these talks. And so we wanted to keep that going. So and like I said, no question is too small. That's the one thing I've learned in life that I've been taught, is always ask questions. If you don't ask, you never get. That's the one thing I've taught my kids, is never not ask me, because if you don't ask, it's always a no. And you have a 50-50 chance of being yes if you ask. And so that's one of the things that I've done in my career and with some of these speakers. Like I said, Matt and I have known each other for a while. This is the first time I met Dr. Wagner, but hopefully it's the first in a long relationship. That's the whole point to this, because we've got a lot of information just in this first hour, basically. And one of the things I wanted to ask Dr. Wagner, he did mention, and which is a great idea. The INL is really focused on, obviously from its founding and up to this point, on nuclear. And as we know, in Indian country, no fault of ours, no fault of Dr. Wagner or anybody probably that's around right now. But Indian country and uranium industry and nuclear industry have a tenuous relationship, I could say, just to put it, to not be so negative, but it hasn't been very good. And I personally, I live on the Wind River Indian Reservation here in Wyoming, and just about not even a mile down the road from where I live, where our allotment is, where we live on 180 acres, is an old, it's been cleaned up, but it was a uranium processing plant during the 1950s. I think it operated for 2 or 3 years. and it was I don't want to say it was a Superfund site, but it was a polluted site that was mitigated, and I want to say in the 90s to the early 2000s by the DOE, the state of Wyoming, and others. But that's just from 2 or 3 years. A lot of tribes had facilities that lasted longer. But to me, the point to having Dr. Wagner speak is to move the conversation forward, because to me, that's the old technology, that's the old nuclear, and we have newer technologies like TerraPower and NuScale. And so, I think we need to have this conversation in country. It's very daunting sometimes because a lot of tribal communities are so anti-nuclear, but I think that that's just an opportunity to have a conversation and move it forward. So my question is around your point, Dr. Wagner, about nuclear in your slides regarding as we move away from, not move away, but as we add nuclear for potentially the production of hydrogen and desalination, where do you see any opportunities for tribes to participate in the research and development? I see value in using small reactor nuclear for production of hydrogen, especially desalination, because here in the West, as you know, water is such a big issue, especially in the Southwest. But do you see any value in tribal partnerships around the hard research and development around those technologies?
So first, let me just say, I don't know all the capabilities of the different tribes and their entities. And so that's, one of the things that people like myself and people at the laboratories have to do is learn, understand where the interests are, what the capabilities are. Certainly don't want to be the kind of person that comes forward and says, yes, Daniel, they need to do this, or, they ought to do that. But have a dialogue on what the possibilities are. So, for example, is there capabilities for research? Is there more capabilities and interest in the energy products? Is there interest in just understanding what those energy products could bring, and also what the risks or maybe hazards are? So it really, I don't have a great answer, because it's more about what would the different tribal entities be interested in, and then I can help connect up with the right opportunities and the right expertise. A couple of things, if I may, I just babble on for a little bit here with you and have a dialogue. A couple of things I wanted to react to. One is, you mentioned it sounds like we have a pretty good relationship currently, particularly with the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, but with others. That wasn't always the case. If you go back decades ago, I don't want to be negative, but cultural resources weren't always handled in the best ways. Respect for certain considerations wasn't always given in the right ways. So we've really worked hard, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years, to build that relationship and build better relationships. So I just want to make the note. I understand that in some cases, I'm going to use that as a segue to mining. Mining uranium for nuclear, or mining cobalt or antimony or nickel or other things for various other parts of the clean energy infrastructure we need to build out. There is a great deal of interest in mining across the Mountain West, and there's also not a lot of trust with respect to the communities impacted by mining in the past. And so this is something that we really need to try to work through. We can work through it with better technologies, as you referred to. In situ mining is far more, generally speaking, far more environmentally friendly than some of the other mining techniques, but it's not perfect. And so, understanding what these impacts look like, what those opportunities are, because there's so much critical resources. Uranium isn't currently classified as a rare earth element or a critical element, but it is critically important. And so are a number of these other ones that I mentioned. I think it's in our best interest, I guess I'll say it that way, to figure out how to extract these resources in a way that is environmentally sustainable, friendly and where nobody gets hurt, for lack of a better way to say it.
No, I agree, Dr. Wagner. And I like your answer, because I think that reminds me of some conversations that we've had with with various DOE folks, and that there's been a series of tribal meetings lately in September and October, with a large set of tribes with DOE, and that's been one of the messages for both meetings has been capacity building and information, technical assistance. And so one of the things that even DOE had mentioned, or certain folks, was that, you know, technical assistance, you know, isn't one of their strong points. You know, the DOE handles research and development and other things, but I think it's an opportunity. And lately, in the conversations that I've had with some other folks from two other national labs, NREL and PNNL, they basically said the same thing: is that in the past they had all the technology, and they went to the tribes and asked, you know, what can our technologies do for you? And it's like speaking two different languages, because if we don't understand technology, or if it's too high tech, it's not going to do anything for us. And then the lab could say, well, we try, you know, but now the conversations are the opposite now. And now those two labs are asking their local tribes, what can we do for you?
Yeah.
And what are your needs? And a lot of times it's technical assistance, it's help with like you mentioned in your presentation about some of the things you're doing with the Shoshone-Bannock tribe and the water on irrigation, and it could be computer time, it could be some of you have 5,000 staffers and experts and professionals, and plus that have this knowledge that could help if we ask the right questions. And I think that's where, you know, it's a great suggestion. I think that the DOE knows, and I think if it's reiterated enough, I think that, you know, from what I foresee is that DOE and its national labs and its partners on all the labs can come up with the solution to be able to provide capacity building and technical assistance that can benefit as many tribes as possible. I think I don't see why that can't happen, and I think that's a first start, because like I said, I'm not a scientist, my degree is not in science, but it's all very interesting, and especially what you mentioned earlier in your presentation in regards to the work that INL has been doing on the STEM side. Obviously, a lot of time and money from DOE and other parts of the federal government have focused on STEM. I have a daughter, just as an example, who's a junior now in civil engineering, environmental engineering at Texas A&M. It's a STEM, she's a STEM person and really focused on STEM issues. And but she's just one. You know, I know there's other Native girls, other minority girls, other women out there that are in that engineering space, and other kids and other young people that are doing that. But we always need more. And I think what you guys are doing is great on that. And I just think that a lot, you know, one of my other hats is we started a nonprofit around STEM called Knowledge River. It's really coordination among all the laboratories, among all the agencies of the federal government. They're all doing STEM stuff. It's not coordinated. And I think about all the resources that are overlapping, that if we didn't even increase the resources, if we just coordinated, how much more benefit that could happen to disadvantaged communities like ours and then others. So I just wanted to say that. I think like I mentioned in my opening, to me, human resources are our greatest resource. And we do ourselves, our community is just a disservice if we're not focused on increasing the development of our next generations. And so I think, like I said, I'm very happy with your answer. Like I said, I probably should have known the answer, but I always look at things from a development standpoint. I don't have any more questions. I think it looks like there's another question coming up.
Actually, Daniel, I see we have a question, but maybe if you give me a minute to elaborate a little bit.
Okay.
So one
Go
is,
ahead.
by the way, all of our jobs that we have are not all PhDs. And so there's another real opening opportunity, I think, that sometimes gets lost, that we hire a lot of technicians. We hire a lot of radcon health physicists. I mean, things that are like 2-year degrees or maybe even no degrees at all. And then we offer opportunities once they're with us. If you want to go on to a 4-year degree, or maybe you want to go on to a 2-year degree, we offer a lot of opportunities for employees to be able to do that. And so I hope that among different tribes, there's not this attitude that they can't see themselves working at a DOE national laboratory, because they very well can. And I think one of our challenges is, and one of the things we work hard on, is to make sure that different Native Americans see themselves, that there is an opportunity there for them, because I think a lot of times they go, there's no way I could do that, and trying to open up their ideas. And then I didn't fully answer your question around hydrogen and nuclear reactors and so forth. So let me say just a few things. A lot of people think about nuclear and they think about the big reactors that we have today that are like gigawatt each. And what's happened in nuclear is a big movement towards small modular reactors on the order of a few hundred megawatts. Still probably too large for any reservation that I'm aware of, but maybe draw power off of a bigger project. But then what might be really interesting is these so-called micro reactors that are on the order of, say, 1 to 20 megawatts, and maybe 1 to 5 might be really good power source for a reservation. And so keep in mind that nuclear is getting much smaller, and then offers a really interesting opportunity to be independent with respect to power, and perhaps even to sell power back to the grid as we work with different folks on microgrids. And one of the things, we're way early, so there's not, I want to be careful, but thinking with our neighbors down to the south, Shoshone-Bannock tribes, about an energy project on their reservation for their own use, as well as perhaps some of our use, and perhaps some of the use goes to the grid. So there's just an amazing set of opportunities that exists that probably a lot of folks aren't aware of. So we just need to have conversations like this.
I agree. Well, thank you for your comments, Doctor. I just have one question, or maybe a comment for Matt, and it's mostly a comment. I know, Matt, that you had mentioned about your regional infrastructure accelerator, and there he is, and your Center for Regional Infrastructure Resilience. And I know you've heard me, Matt, talk about the Great Northern Corridor. I've been talking about this for a long time in Indian country, as you know, and I don't know when it started, but if I remember right, during the Obama administration, there was this move from Seattle to Chicago. The old Great Northern Railroad basically ran through those states, through the upper US, and there was a movement to designate the corridor as a region or nationally important to our economy and for defense. And so all the states from Washington to Illinois, and I think even Wisconsin, joined, the Department of Transportation's all joined up, and BNSF Railroad and others came through and created this organization. But then it didn't get the designation, and sort of I don't want to say it fell to the wayside. I had some conversations with the BNSF Railroad, and they believe that it still exists. It's still a entity. That hasn't completely fell away. But do you see any value in resurrecting that idea of having the Great Northern Corridor or a designation? Does that overlap into what your guys are doing with the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator and with Canada?
No, thanks for bringing that up, Daniel. It absolutely does. We have met with the board of the Great Northern Corridor several times this year and looked at their priority projects from Seattle to Chicago. And it is very important to see that corridor and what it represents to the economy of the Western United States, especially on the northern part of the Western US. So yes, I think it's a very viable corridor still. It's active, and the DOT directors of Washington, Idaho, Montana, Dakotas, and all the way into Illinois are still on the board of the GNCC. So it is something that we're very interested in trying to support and look at the future of how to overcome the obstacles on that corridor. So
Well, no,
answer is yes.
no, I'm glad to hear that, because as you know, and at one time several years ago, I did add up all the tribes that are in the states from Washington over to Chicago, and it's like 70 or 80. I might be off a little bit, but it's a significant amount of tribes. At least 10 or 15% of the tribes in the US are in those states within that corridor. And then also the BN Railroad itself crosses, again, I can't remember, and I can get the figures, but crosses various reservations. And so not just the railroad, but the highways and the interstates. So to me, I keep on mentioning the Great Northern Corridor for economic development reasons, but also again to include tribes in that conversation, as well as because of its importance and trade wise. We're as we've seen earlier this, a couple of months ago, when the rail workers were wanting to go on strike, and they still may, because they didn't. I don't think they voted on their agreement. And so, but if that were to happen, especially that corridor and all the others in the US, would just come to a stop. And so I know I can't remember offhand the percentage of trade that goes out of that through that corridor out of Seattle to the Pacific and other places, but it is significant. And so I think that, like I said, I always look through everything through a tribal lens. And so that's going to be another subject, hopefully, that we talk about later in our webinar series, probably towards the end. But I just wanted to mention that, because I think from what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of opportunities for Penwar and the tribes, not just in your region, but throughout the US, to partner on infrastructure, P3s, and all the other things that you guys are doing, because especially, like I said, there's not enough time, but as you know, I've mentioned the Columbia River Treaty, which involves Canada and the US, the MOU between Canada and the United States on energy, the framework, and so there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of moving parts between the US and Canada, but also between the First Nations, Canada and the US, and the tribes. I think that's where the low-hanging fruit is. And I think just to get people thinking about the future and moving the conversation. So I just wanted to mention that just having you on as a speaker has brought up all these issues, and I think they're really important as we move forward. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Daniel.
Michelle, could you read the next questions?
Yeah, we have two now. So the first one is INL involved in DOE's $2.5 billion advanced reactor demonstration program from the bipartisan infrastructure law? Have demonstration sites been selected? Looks like John Wagner is answering as well. Looks like he's typing out an answer. But feel free to say it out loud as well.
Yeah, I'll finish typing that up to provide some resources for people to have in the future. But the short answer is yes. So we're involved in all of the DOE's advanced reactor demonstration program projects. For context, there's 2 large, what they call demo projects. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then there's 5 risk reduction awards. And then there's 3 that are kind of earlier TRL awards that people probably don't get as much visibility. I think this question pertains, since it's referring to the funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law, it's focused on the 2 big demo projects. Those are projects led by 2 private companies. One of them is Hydropower and one of X-Energy. We're working with both of them to provide technical assistance, R&D type of support. They're very different technologies, and they're different companies, and we have different kind of arrangements in terms of what they want from us. In terms of sites, yes, they have selected their sites. Hydropower has selected a site in Kimmer, Wyoming. It's currently a coal generation site. So the idea there is to repurpose this coal generation site with nuclear, shut down the coal, replace it with nuclear, and repurpose as much as possible. And it's a great opportunity. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on this for people to kind of think about the opportunities around such a project. First of all, the community is very interested in, what kind of jobs does this look like? What is this going to look like in terms of safety? They haven't had nuclear before, so they're trying to understand what does it mean to have a nuclear project. In addition to just repurposing the site, the idea is that you'll repurpose as much workforce as possible and probably bring in more workforce. Questions about what does that mean to our housing? What does it mean to our water system, to our sewage systems, and all these kinds of state taxes? What does this all mean? And so really an interesting project. And then, I think we're probably all aware of how difficult it is to build new transmission. So by replacing coal with something else, in this case, nuclear, you can repurpose all that transmission that's there. So really an interesting project. And I'll tell you one other thing about this. So the Western Wyoming Community College is watching this going, how do we affect our curriculum, and what changes should we make to help support the workforce for this project? So they came and visited with us, and we had a series of ongoing discussions around that. The other big demo project, the one led by X-Energy, they have also selected a site in Washington State. And so they're probably having similar activities. We're a little less involved in the region on that one. But similar things, and probably Pacific Northwest National Laboratory might be involved in some of the regional issues there, as they do the same. Now, they're not repurposing a coal site, so a little bit different strategy there. But anyway, bottom line is yes, we're involved, and yes, they have selected sites. But they're not, these 2 demos are not the end of the game. There's lots of other companies working on demonstration projects as well. So therefore, there's lots of additional opportunities if anyone on this call is interested in getting involved in hosting a nuclear demonstration project.
All righty, thank you very much. It looks like we do have one more question here. How do you see tribes fulfilling the Justice 40 executive order in energy projects? So the goal is 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to flow to disadvantaged communities. Maybe for another roundtable discussion?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. That's something that's really important to me that I've been focused on since the Justice 40 initiative was announced by the administration back at the beginning of last year. Or how I can't remember when the administration came in, sorry. But I think that, as I like to say, is that the Justice 40 is a floor, not a ceiling. It's a minimum, and I always advocate for more than 40%. But how I see, and it's specific to specific projects, right, or specific funding from the infrastructure bill, and then Inflation Reduction Act that just came out. And so there's specific funding that it covers and others that it doesn't cover. And so and that the DOE is also working on regulations and rules, and it's a work in progress as they move forward. And so but I see it working in a lot of different ways. I mean, the low-hanging fruit opportunities are obviously around workforce development. Dr. Wagner mentioned Western Wyoming College. The Hydropower just made a presentation last week in Laramie, Wyoming, where I was in attendance, and they I just saw an article this morning about Central Wyoming College, our local junior college here in Riverton. It was suggested that CWC also work to help retrain or train workers, especially tribal members here, because the Hydropower or the Cameron is just the other side of the mountain from us, and so not very far. And so, so one of the benefits of the Justice 40 particularly will be workforce development. But also once you develop those jobs, hopefully they get hired. And so hopefully it'll be actual jobs and revenue to individuals and income taxes to communities, but also the opportunity for procurement for small business to be able to sell to these projects, sell services, sell equipment, sell other things like being constructors or whatever these projects need. You know, the Nature project, Hydropower project, I think is at 2 billion in between 1 and 2 right now, and so that's between $400 and $800 million that impact that has to go to disadvantaged communities, one of which are tribal communities. And so, like Dr. Wagner said, Cameron's a small town, just as an example, and that part of Wyoming is very rural, and so not really a lot of people that we're talking about. And so, how do you make sure that 40% of the economic impact flows to those communities? And so it's a tough issue, but a lot of smart people are working on it, and individually each of the project proponents, not just of those projects, but all the programs that fall under DOE that are Justice 40 related, have to have plans in place when they make applications for the funding and how that they're going to do this. And so it's a work in progress, I'd say. But I think to me the biggest opportunity is on the procurement side, but also it never really is mentioned often is on the partnership side. I see tribal partnerships as actually equity partners. I think that there's opportunities, there's financing, there's funding through our federal partners for tribes to buy equity into these projects. And I think that would be fair. I think that if there are tribes interested, I think that I can't speak for anybody because it's so new, but I'm sure if tribes made a good effort to partner on these projects, I think they would find willing ears to listen to see how that could go. But I think that's going to be the biggest opportunity is in my mind in the long term is on wealth creation and on income. Is that jobs are great, you know, a high wage and high tech professional jobs are great to help get our communities out of poverty, but nothing works better than having equity, having assets, having wealth that we can accumulate for our communities. Then that works the best. And I think that's one of our goals with these discussions again is how do we foster that dialogue and those developments moving forward so that Indian country can accrue some of what our neighbors have had for years. And so hopefully that answers the question, but you're right. It's such a big issue. It's going to probably be touched on throughout the next 5 webinars as we move forward. So,
well, one of the things I think we should mention too is I believe that you know all tribes aren't the same. You know, you've got your 240 public law 240s, your 280s, your concurrent jurisdiction, your IRA tribes, and your treaty tribes. And currently, you know, when you look at the treaty tribes, you know, those commitments are already there from the U.S. government. And you know, I know the Justice 40 and all these other initiatives work towards trying to make a better day for the impoverished areas. But at the same time, there's still a long time commitment, you know, as an Article 1 entity of the United States government. You know, Indian commerce is regulated and controlled by Congress. And so with that being said, you know, there's already commitments made in the treaties. And I think the authors of Justice 40 have good intentions, but at the same time, it's just like anything else when new administrations or new folks are seated in these positions, it's a re-education process, and a one-size-fits-all solution ain't always the best angle. And so those are some of the thoughts I have on this. I know, I just wanted to kind of speak to some of the ideas, some of the questions, Daniel, if you don't mind. I know that there was thoughts about, having, more of a presence as far as partnerships with the two gentlemen and their respective fields and backgrounds and establishments that they're working with. I think it would be a great idea to have, regional committees, or however you wanted to go about doing this. I know working with one tribe isn't always the best fit. And I think, and I'm speaking as an energy director, and, from the Crow tribe, I've always served in the capacity of fossil fuels. And I know that, I've always said, I've always countered the saying that coal is dead. I don't look at coal as being dead. I think the innovation and technology of coal is dead. I think we should look at new developments for coal. Just like the Crow tribe, we've never gotten credit for just in our attempts towards doing coal to liquids, biomass to liquids through liquefaction, capturing 98.6% of the carbon back in 2008 and 9, when President Obama first got seated as president. And so, with that being said, it's there's a lot to this. I know that the innovation and the labs are helping in so many ways, but at the same time, it's not so much what we're dealing with as far as on the political front. There is a lot of policy that stands as impediments for certain tribes. And as I mentioned earlier, there's several different kinds of tribes. It's not just one. There's large land-based tribes. There's tribes that have no land and they have no resource. And so the large land-based tribes, they have a lot of resources. They have a lot of, wind, water, the ability for solar, whatever fossil fuel resources are there. Mainly, there's 12 tribes that control 60% of the nation's fossil fuel resources. And 4 of those nations, those sovereign nations, are actually continue to provide product into the market. And so with that being said, it's down to about 4 tribes that control 60% of the nation's resources. And I think it'd be ideal to have the ability to have continued updates from the labs. I know that there's Matt and John, I know you guys are accessible, and I know that not a lot of people know you. That's why we want to bring you onto this this webinar and let people know that there is an avenue for success in some of these areas. As an energy director, as a person working with tribal energy, the Crow tribe being the largest private coal owner in the nation, I would invite as much innovation and technology. We're not the big bad wolf here as far as 4-letter words when it comes to coal. We're always looking for innovative ways. And like I stated earlier, back in 2008 with the Many Stars project with Australian America and the Crow tribe, we weren't asked to, but we've seen the future. And we already made account for capturing 98.6% of that carbon. And we never get credit for that. In fact, I think it goes the other way, that Crow don't care, we're trying to kill the environment, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not even like that. We got 2.4 million acres, and we want it to stay as pristine and beautiful as always. We've got one of the world's only blue ribbon, trout fishing streams, the Bighorn River. And, I don't see us wanting to ruin any of that. In fact, we want utilize our resources and create opportunities to have a better environment, create biodegradable resources that will not harm our environment as stewards of this land. And so these are some of the ideas that I think that would be, that would be welcome, is where you would have, you've got 11 tribes in Montana, and we're mainly the only treaty tribe. Everybody else opted into the IRA, the Wheeler-Howard Act tribe, back in 1936, which put themselves under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So, when speaking to tribes, Mr. Wagner and Mr. Morrison, there's different, they have a different relationship with the U.S. government as some other tribes do. And so I think to capture where everyone's coming from and still not necessarily interfere with that relationship, but mostly enhance it, would be where we would have these different, groups, to work with the different labs, and not maybe just, because everybody's involved and everybody wants to be involved. I know that, there's, Mr. Morrison, you're on the northwest side, Mr. Wagner, John, you're over in Idaho, and we have the BN going right through there. And so we want to make things better for our neighbors. And, and that was always the issue before, where they didn't want coal going through their backyard. But at the same time, they weren't opposed to us having a Coda Liquids project. In fact, the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians voted at their 60th annual conference to have Coda Liquids, have the Crow tribe be the pilot program for Coda Liquids. In fact, they sent that to NCAI. NCAI passed a resolution asking the same thing of the U.S. government and DOE. So, I mean, there's those areas like that that need to be, re-entertained. And of course, there's going to have to be some more education for the new administration in some areas when it comes to the fossil fuel development. We're not just trying to, create resources by destroying the environment. In fact, it's the reverse. So with that, thank you, Daniel. I just want to hand it back. Just wanted to make those comments.
No worries. Thank you, CJ. We're just coming up on the hour, so we're almost up on time. I just wanted to mention that before we leave, we are planning our second webinar. The tentative date so far is December 5th. Thanksgiving at the end of November kind of pushes things around, and so we'll once we get a permanent date, we will send it around to folks that are watching and folks that are on our mailing list. And so we will for sure send our next date out. But I wanted to thank Dr. Wagner. I wanted to thank Matt Morrison for taking time out of their busy schedules to come talk with us for a little while, give us some ideas, share with us what you guys are doing with your organizations. And hopefully this discussion has given you some ideas on how things could look like in the future with your organizations, but as well as with Indian country and energy. And so I wanted to say that in closing. And again, thank you everybody for coming and listening in on our first webinar. The first one's always the hardest because you never know who's going to show up. And I'm glad that we had some good attendance, but also to you audience members who will be watching in the future. I'm glad that you came in and spent some time with us to start looking at these issues in the Indian country. So with that, I would like to close. Michelle, do we have anything else before we close?
Oh, I think you covered it all and got most of or actually all of our questions answered. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you guys.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank all you guys.
Hey, thank you guys. Great stuff.
Alrighty, we'll see you next time.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Hello.